I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander. And today we'd like to talk to you about divine order in the midst of change. Divine order is a concept that some people may not be familiar with, Iris. Could that be possible?
I doubt that. I think we're all familiar with divine order, but we might not put that name to it. But we know that there is divine order in the world. And if we just get out of the way, then we're shown which way to go and what to do. But we have to get I think it's the personality self. We have to get out of the way and get under control. And then when we do, we can see order in our lives. And it's when we fret and worry and exert any of those negative qualities in our lives, then we can't see that divine order is there. Even when we're facing greatest change, the order is there, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think fundamental to metaphysical thought and new thought, which is our philosophy, there is the belief that there is divine order in the midst of all that's happening. So there's not only purpose, but below or undergirding, as we sometimes say, the circumstance or the situation or the appearance, there is divine order. And that divine order is there despite the appearances to the contrary. And I think it's really important that we understand that there is a dynamic of ourselves, the ego, the personality that we have, that really fights against divine order in some instances, because sometimes, or very often, most of us believe that we know what ought to happen. And we also look at the world in a different way, you know, and certainly in today's environment, we look at the world and we question a lot of things that are going on. But the fact is that the divine order that is creating the manifest reality that is all that really is the focus and needs to be the focus of our thought and of our thought process. Probably one of the great spiritual leaders of our movement was Mary Baker Eddy, the foundress of Christian Science, who taught about the non-reality of matter. And what she taught was that the physical world that we see, and of course other spiritual teachers in the Christian faith and Western faith and Eastern faith believes it, but she articulated it in a very American view, and we call that New Thought and metaphysics. And there are a whole myriad of groups such as ours that in unity that embrace these concepts and ideas, but at the core of it is that there is a visible world, that there's a visible experience that we all have in this life, but that's not what's real. And it goes to the core of the fact that each of us is more than the physical body that we see. We know that we're mental, we know that we're spiritual, we can't see our mind and we can't see our thought and we can't see our soul, but we know that it's there. So we see the physical and we believe that the physical is the tangible thing that's real. But every spiritual faith and even non-spiritual scientific reality teaches us that what we see with our human eyes is not all that's there. And science teaches us, of course, that everything is energy. All of this is energy. We believe that the chair that I'm sitting in is a chair, but we know that it is particles of energy that are moving and vibrating at different rates of speed. So when we see things with our human eyes, and when we respond to them on a human level based upon what we see or what we feel, then we're not responding to what is truly there. And probably the greatest example of that is when someone confronts us or angers us or hurts us, the first thing that we do is we respond to that based upon what they've said or how they behave. What do we know from a psychological standpoint is that they didn't probably say that because of the reasons that we believe. They said what they said because of a myriad of things that we haven't seen, that are the interactions between us as persons, and we know that on the psychological level. So we know that it's true on the mental level, we know that it's true on the spiritual level as well. So we see with our human eyes, and yet we know that there's something beyond what we can see with those human eyes. And of course, in the Western tradition and in Christian tradition, Christian teaching is all about the fact that there's a whole universe, whole world, heaven, that there's this spiritual dimension that transcends what we see with our physical eyes. And so understanding that and realizing that that is the reality in truth, and that the physical aspects, the physical behavior that we see is transient and is a vehicle through which we're moving. Now that all sounds pretty complex and sounds pretty dry, I'm sure, but really what we're talking about is the fact that there's much more to life than we can see.
Yes, and it might sound complex in a sense, but it's really very simple, isn't it? And we can equate it to the fact that the planets have their precision in which they move, the tides have their precision with which they come and go, and all of life of nature has a precision. And so then we would know that that same precision is true in our own lives, but we know too that, as you said, everything is energy, and we have the power to change that through our own thinking, through our own way of being. And if we keep our wits about us and just stay calm and flow with the energy, then we come out ahead, and we come out having lived with divine order and helped to create it, because we are indeed co-creators with Creator God, and and God gave mankind free will, so we create that which we wish to, and sometimes we create in a negative way, unfortunately. But if we can go with the flow of divine order, then usually we create what we're pleased with ultimately.
And at the core of our belief, of course, is that there is the divine nature of God. There is divine mind, as we call it, and that is a constant reality, and that the spiritual and the mental and the physical realms all come together, although we're in this physical experience that we call life. And yet we tend to believe that we're just human beings, but then we always say, or we teach, that we're actually spiritual or mental beings that are in a physical experience. And the physical experience is really the transient experience, where the mental and the spiritual is the eternal. And one of the exciting things that's come out of our movement, and also coming out of the areas of psychology and the mental sciences and mental health, is the concept and idea of consciousness. And of course, we spend a lot of time talking about consciousness, and a lot of spiritual groups don't do that. New Thought and metaphysical groups do. And we talk a lot about this issue of consciousness. And consciousness is thought and mind that flows, and we think of thought as being a part of our brain, and so it is to an extent, but there's much more than that. And consciousness transcends the power of our brain. It is the level on which we truly exist, and that level of consciousness is the reality, and in that realm, there is divine order always and everywhere, despite the appearances. And I go back to the fact that people behave in ways that we don't like, or that are damaging and hurtful, and there's some terrible, awful things that are happening in the world, and that the prisons are full of people that have done atrocious things. But we have to understand that those people, and as we understand it, it doesn't mean that we're condoning it, it doesn't mean that we're overlooking it, it doesn't mean that we don't believe that there are consequences to the actions. But the fact is that we all came into this life exactly the same, in a perfect state. And we all have gone through a variety of experiences. And as Buckminster Fuller said, some of us are less damaged than others. And so many of us have been severely damaged through a variety of experiences. Some have overcome those negative experiences and have become stronger because of them. Others have become defeated in the midst of them, and then they behave and act out in ways that are hurtful and damaging to themselves and to others. But the reality is that divine order and our divine nature transcends that behavior. And it's hard when we see people acting in a certain way. It's hard when we see things happening in the world, difficulties, wars and conflicts and hate and all the rest. But as we see those things, it's wonderful to know that those things are limited to the physical realm, to the physical experience. Doesn't mean that they don't exist in the interaction with us and we're not a part of them, but it does mean that we can see beyond them to the truth and the reality of what is really true. In the midst of every war and conflict, there is perfect peace. In the midst of abject poverty, there is abundance. In the midst of disease and illness, there is health and wholeness. And all of that undergirds the appearances that we have and that we see with our physical eyes. And that's kind of the belief in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And then when we rise above, when anyone rises above the negativities of life, then they're living with divine order. And divine order is, it might be classed as God is love. So they're living with love in their hearts, love for others, love for themselves, love for what they do, love for their desires, and love for life itself. Because if we can remember that God is love, then it's really easier to emulate God, isn't it? Because it's actually it's so simple.
It is. It's a simple concept, but it's difficult sometimes to articulate and to embrace, to get our hands around. But if we can get our hands around it, then we are able to deal with life in a totally different way. We're able to see life in a totally different way. And again, we're not talking at all about denying the reality of the experiences that we're in. We're never talking about that. And we're never talking about condoning negativity, but we are talking about the fact that we can transcend it through our way of thinking and our way of seeing it. And just on a simple level, as one of the issues that I just touched on a moment ago had to do with poverty. Every one of us have had the experience of not having enough money. Everybody wants more money, and certainly in the West we want more money, but we have the experience of not having enough money. And so often when we see the fact that our checkbook's empty, the rent's due, the light bill's due, we have this horrible situation. I have a friend who talks to me about the train rail of his life, that he's always going to a derailment in his financial situation, and he certainly is. And that's the way he views it. But it's interesting, the way that we view life is often the way that we experience it. And so he spends his life going to this derailment. But the fact is that when we have the lack in our lives, the economic lack in our lives, the lack of resources, if we can see beyond the lack that we have at the present moment to the reality of the abundance and prosperity that we can claim, then we open our way of thinking, we open our minds and our hearts and our lives to ways in which we're going to be able to bring abundance to us. And so we're able then to eliminate that poverty with abundant supply, because our mind doesn't see the empty checkbook. We see it in the moment, and we see it, and it grabs our heart, and we say, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? But if we get past that, and we see the divine order, and the fact that abundant supply is a divine reality of this universe, and that supply is accessible to you and to me and to everyone, then we can embrace the concept that we can do something to make that happen for us and become manifest in our lives. And then we focus off of the problem of our lack, and we open up the space in which an idea can come in that's going to guide us and direct us. Maybe what we need to do is work some overtime. You know, it's very practical. It's not ethereal. It's not a kind of idea that you just really snap your fingers or trust the universe to provide. It is the fact that if we can see beyond the appearances of life at all of its levels and see divine order, then we can claim the prosperity, the abundance, the health, the joy, the happiness, the love, and the light that we need to have and that we should have.
Yes, and I think Mother Teresa would be a prime example of that, because she went through life with a very simple wants and needs, in a sense, but they were not so simple. She wanted everything for everyone, and she got lots of money given and lots of material things donated. And I know I was very fascinated when you said you had spent some time with her once in one of the facilities that you were responsible for. And that was a very lovely time that you had, wasn't it?
It was, and there was a great example of someone who was able to see beyond appearances. And one of the things that she said that I shared in that lecture was that, you know, people are people, and whether they're poor or they have money, they're all the same. So it's a very interesting process, because she was able to see beyond what she saw at the surface and to see the truth of divine order in the midst of everything. And she knew that she had to advocate for some people in order to make things happen. But in fact, she saw beyond the appearance of poverty, and she saw great wealth, and she was able to attract it. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month, we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
Well, divine order in the world is an interesting concept, isn't it? It's something, of course, that we believe and talk a lot about, despite whatever's taking place, and it doesn't matter whether it's today or whether it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. The strife and the complexities of life really are never what they appear to be, are they, Iris? And no matter what we go through as a human family, in this world, there is always divine and perfect order in the midst of whatever's happening, isn't there?
Yes, in the midst of chaos and change that we think is unthinkable, but good comes of all of that. And if we can just know that and be quiet within ourselves, quiet enough to just access the divine within, then we can see that divine order is prevalent throughout the world. And when things are happening that we think are terrible, well, they are terrible. There are terrible things happening all the time, but it's not because there's not divine order. It's because man himself, women, have gone against divine order with their own personality, will, their own will. And so, and that's part of life, and that's part of why we're here. We have that opportunity to live with divine order or to create chaos and to create problems for others. And so the more we can be calm within ourselves, the more throughout the earth there's calmness. Because the Rupert Sheldrake had that, proved that with the monkeys, where they taught the monkeys to wash their food. And then when 50% of the monkeys on that certain island off the coast of the island of Japan were washing their food, then on the other islands, the monkeys were washing their food. So we know it's, we can see it around us all the time, that divine order is there. We have to but live it and accept it, and not fight against too much the what we see as not divine order, because when we fight it, we're giving it energy.
Absolutely. And so often we see that happening.
Yeah.
You know, it's very common for people to start talking about how terrible it is, how terrible it is. It doesn't matter whether it's world conditions, whether it's political leaders, whether it's economics, whatever it is. And we can easily become a part of that negative spiral of thought and of influence. But when we talk about divine order, we talk about seeing divine order in the midst of these places. And the fact is that for some people, they're not going to come to that realization very readily. So we're not evangelists to go out and tell people that they're wrong in their way of thinking or in the things that they're seeing about life. But what we are saying is, we don't see that. I don't see the world as a bad place. I don't see the world as a terrible place. And we gather people around us, and our teaching is based upon the reality that despite the appearance, these things, the negative aspects of life, are limited to this physical plane. And we are physical, we're spiritual, and we're mental. So this mind, body, spirit comes together. And if only 1/3 of us is experiencing negativity, then 2/3 of us can be at peace and in the midst of divine order. And that's really an important aspect of our dimension of spirituality. And we're not talking, again, we always say this, we're not trying to convert anyone, we're not trying to change anyone's religion. But from our spiritual perspective, what we do see is the constancy of divine mind, the constancy of the presence of the power of God. And we see that divine reality never changing. So we don't believe that God's will changes from time to time. We don't believe that there is someone or something that's divine that is pulling the strings of life if we do a certain thing or don't do a certain thing, or if people behave in a certain way. Divine order is constant, and divine love is constant, and divine light and life is constant. And if we can connect with that in a mental way, in a spiritual way, and in a physical way, then no matter what happens around us, we are able to transcend that. And again, it doesn't mean that the things that are happening aren't bad in the physical sense. And so often people will say that to us, that we're talking about the fact that we're justifying evil or bad. We're not talking about that at all. We are saying that it is a physical aspect of life that is only a part of life. And I go back to the issue of the behavior of human beings and people. These people who have done terrible, awful things, what we need to see in them, and it doesn't mean that we have to release them from prison and we have to condone what they've done, but what we're called to do is to see them with the reality of who they are, and that is perfect people that have been very damaged. What we see is a perfect world that's been very damaged by a variety of things. And as we change our way of thinking and our way of behavior, and we align ourselves with divine truth and with this constancy of divine presence and divine mind, then divine order will become manifest. And, when we look at it from a biblical sense, and we want to really be hesitant about that because we are not literalists at all. But when we look at the Bible in Genesis all the way through Revelation, if we look at Genesis, we're looking at a place that was in perfect divine order. And then out of divine order came the behavior or the thinking and the transcendent behavior. And I'm not talking about sin, and I'm not talking about any of that, but I'm talking about the example that we're given there of the fact that when people began to see things differently, then Eden was transformed. And then that transformation from Eden, from the Eden consciousness, all the way through Scripture and all the way through other holy writings and other texts that we have examples of people who are constantly trying to come back to the Eden state of consciousness, come back to the awareness of the presence and power of the divine in the midst of where we are, despite the appearances. And therein lies the whole problem. We believe in appearances, and the appearances don't tell the whole tale. And from a psychological standpoint and from a counseling standpoint, we know that. We know that when people come in, that most of the time we're not hearing what the real problem is. Most of the time in our daily lives, we're not responding to what the real problem is. It's deeper. It transcends what we see on the surface, and we need to be able to see it deeper. And what we see is divine. What we see is divine order. What we see is perfection. What we see is health and strength and wholeness and prosperity and all of the good things in the midst of whatever's happening, regardless of the appearances.
And we have control of our own lives and our own thoughts and our own actions and our own the way we resonate to others. And as we do, then we have control of our surroundings, of our environment, of the world. And if just a lot of people say, what can one person do? Well, one person can be still enough, just still enough to know. And when they are, it makes a difference in all the world. You were talking about consciousness, and we talk often of the global brain, mass consciousness. Well, what is that but a conglomerate of all? So if enough people are calm and peaceful, then it changes the entire global brain. It changes the mass consciousness, and it changes it according to the way people are what is predominant.
Absolutely. And a simple example of that we give all the time is we've all walked into a house or into a family or into a group of people and either felt welcome or unwelcome. Well, it doesn't have to do with whether we're welcome or unwelcome. It has to do with the vibration of the thoughts and the process that's taking place in that environment. Thoughts create things, and that collective vibration that comes from conscious thought creates an environment, and that environment can be changed. And that's why we say so often, surround yourself with people of like mind. Surround yourself with people who are positive and affirmative, who see life in a positive way. Don't surround yourself with the people who are negative, who believe in appearances and will tell you how awful it is. If you're hurting, the last thing that you need to do is to go to somebody who's going to say, yes, you're hurting and you're going to hurt worse. And because there are a universe of people who are going to help you in your suffering to stay in your suffering. And there are a group of people, a lot of people in this world who are in that consciousness. But that's changing in a wonderful and magnificent way. And despite what we believe, the collective consciousness of our world is changing in such a positive and wonderful way. And we may not be able to see it clearly, and many people debate that, but we believe that these are the best of times and that life is evolving, that this world is evolving in a magnificent and positive way, and that the appearances that we have and the difficulties that we have are transient, that they're temporary, and that they're bringing us to a point in time when things will be totally and completely different. And that's going to happen, and we believe it.
Yes, indeed. And yes, there are undesirable things happening, but undesirable things have always happened. And it's getting better and better progressively as man progresses. And as we think those thoughts, then it just helps to elevate the energy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And as the energy is elevated, we make more connection with divine order. And as we make more connection with divine order, we're guided and directed in right ways, in right action, in positive thought, and good things begin to happen. Excuse me. And then as that takes place, there are less and less people who are believing the negative aspects and creating the negative aspects. And we've done whole programs, and you and I have done seminars and talks for a long time on the creative power of mind, and we create our environment through our thoughts. We create our environment. People respond to the creative power of mind, and we are constantly creating our world according to our thoughts. And that's one thing that we need to understand, and we need to understand it clearly, that the world that we're creating, the environment, the house, the home, the family, the workplace, the school, the community, all of it is created by mind and is created through the dynamic of the creative force of mind and people thinking the thoughts that they think and seeing the things that they see. And it's always the people who can see beyond the appearances, the visionaries, the positive thinkers, the people who can see beyond what's happening. And we see it so often in life, people who come from abject poverty and have no advantage at all in life, who are able to see beyond where they've come from to the glory and wonder of what they can become, and their lives are transformed, and yet others stay. And that's not an indictment of those who stay, because we believe everybody's coming and everybody's changing, and that the world is a good and welcoming place.
Yes, Oprah Winfrey is a good example of that. I was reading just this week. She said that when she was in The Color Purple, that movie, it changed her life. And because just the idea of the people in that movie rising above their surroundings, and it made a difference in her, and she's made a difference in so many people's lives. It's a wonderful thing that she has. And I'd like to say, too, that we can know that the energies are higher and higher evermore. So because of the children coming in are so bright and shining, and they wouldn't be more so if the energies around them were not more so. Isn't that so?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so divine order is in the midst of us, in the children, and all around us if we would only see it.
It's reflected in the lives of the children.
Absolutely. And so we'd like to close this program with the hope that the ideas and concepts that we've shared with you have been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing new thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.